With gambling as super apparent in saloons as it was also useful pastime, it was also a risk if you were a cheat, and you might also have to cheat death, because you're not supposed to do that. Some, like the weapon fight at the OK Corral, were the outcome of long simmering feuds and rivalries, but most were the result of confrontation between outlaws and law enforcement. Although in movies, televisions would like to us believe otherwise, it was very rare when pew-pew fights occurred with the two standing fighters off squarely facing one another from a distance in a dusty street. They would just knock your butt out. The romanticized image of the Old West style fight was born in the dime novels of the late 19th century and perpetuated in film era to make such a point that this fiction version of what our mind's eye quickly conjures up when we hear the word weapon fight. You know what I mean. In actuality, the real fights of the Old West were actually so rarely civilized that yes, we might have heard some of these famed robber criminals like sharpshooters like Billy the Kid, Calamity Jane, Jesse James, and Annie Oakley. They wouldn't really wait, you know, unlike Clint Eastwood films. It was probably more rotted than it was organized, and the Wild West saloons were also known for its culture of its violence. Weapon slingers and outlaws, as I mentioned, often frequent these establishments, and disputes were often settled with a handheld weapon fight. Even saloon owners would also provide their own weapons for their patrons, and saloons itself would become a battleground during an open firefight. Saloons would also appear in every town and were your average pit stop on a long journey, and if you're a man who hasn't seen or felt the touch of a woman in a very long time and you can afford it, you might stop by to a certain saloon for a drink and quench whatever thirsty self you might be craving. Like a gentleman's club, most Wild West saloons catered almost exclusively to the white men in the frontier, although women could sometimes find work in the bars as dance hall girls or workers of the evening. But of course you have the madam of the house making sure the security of her girls are okay, but when it comes to money and gold rushes, it was pretty much more valuable than the average person's life. Respectable women didn't frequent Wild West saloons, but women who were less concerned about their reputations might find work there. Many saloon girls were widows and had no other means of support, or young girls who were seeking something more than working on their family farm. They wanted adventure, if you know what I mean. The girls were to dance with the men and get the men to buy them drinks, earning as much as $10 per week, which is pretty a lot for back then. Most saloon girls also made commissions from the drinks they sold, and whiskey sold to the customers were generally marked up to 30 to 60% over its wholesale price. But like all dames who worked in these type of eras, were definitely in her bag, as her status would be noted and gossiped throughout town. One famous saloon girl was also named Fanny Porter. Fanny's family arrived in Texas when she was just 1 year old, immigrating from England. Growing up as both an immigrant and the middle of the Wild West may have inspired her to enter the sporting life, as she took up the trade as a teenager and opened up her own brothel at the age of 20 in San Antonio. In some ways though, these saloons would have been another term for these women of the night to rebrand themselves as cantina girls. However, despite themselves and the services they provide, their life expectancies were actually short. In a typical night, and I'm not just talking about in case, you know, someone does something to them, it was because of the drinking. A woman may have to have consumed up to 30 beers a night. An average lifespan of a woman in the cantina trade was less than a decade. Like as in current times in Japan, they also have these host clubs that if you go and meet these very handsome and beautiful people, you would also be forced to drink with them. And like the cantina girls back in the Wild West, a lot of these people would suffer a lot of liver issues, which means cantina girls still exist today, just not where we are well known of. And since I mentioned it was so dirty, they'd even bring their horses in the saloon. Like the idea of the Wild West, the Wild West and anyone could do anything they want. That also included bringing your horse inside of the bar to take a selfie with. Like in this photo, where the men of the saloon located in Utah took their horse to be part of the group chat profile pic, and I think my favorite part of this photo is how the bartender is also posing. But despite how gross it was back then, even part of the historical tourist attractions, there are some saloons still open and even in operation today. Saloons like the White Elephant in Fort Worth, Texas, was one of the more than 60 Wild West saloons in the city, and at the end of the 19th century, it is actually still open today for functioning, albeit in a different building. But it still holds a lot of significance as it holds a lot of memento, part of American Western history. Number 10. Amelia Earhart. An American aviation pioneer and celebrated figure in the early 20th century, Amelia Earhart was the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Notably, in 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean, covering a distance of over 2,000 miles from Newfoundland, Canada to Northern Ireland. Beyond her aviation achievements, Earhart was a prominent advocate for women's rights. She encouraged women to pursue careers and goals that were traditionally considered to be male-dominated. Earhart was also an author and a popular public speaker, which I wish I could do, and she wrote several books about her experience in aviation and women's issues. In this photo, what seems to be a normal photo of Amelia is actually the last photo we have of her before she went missing. She may have survived her round-the-world attempt only to be later captured by Japanese forces. According to a newly discovered photograph, and according to the new History Channel documentary, the photo is found in a National Archive file as it is shown Earhart alive after her plane fell low on fuel during her mission. The photo depicts a woman believing to be Earhart and a man who looked like her navigator, Fred. A Japanese ship can be seen in the background, carrying what appears to be her plane, as her fate has been debated for decades and has sparked several conspiracy theories. Meh, what do you guys think? Or are people just hopeful? Number 9. Volcano. We all love a good nature tour or park hike, but for this man, David Johnston, he really loved the nature of volcanoes and geology, and ultimately pursued his education in the field. He was working with the US Geological Survey at the Cascades Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington, and he was assigned to monitor the activity of Mount St. Helens, a stratovolcano that had been showing recently a lot of activity. This photo is when he was doing his research on the earthly giant, but tragically on May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted explosively, triggering a massive landslide and a pyroclastic flow. David Johnston was stationed at the observation post on the ridge known as Coldwater 2, about 6 miles north of the volcano. He radioed in the now famous message, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," to his colleagues at the USGS headquarters, alerting them to the eruption. Regrettably, Johnston's post was directly in the path of the advancing pyroclastic flow, and he perished in the eruption alongside with many others. His body was unfortunately never recovered, and he was only 30 years old. Number 8. The 1986 Challenger. I love space, and I think space is really amazing and cool, as so did these guys, the crew members of the Challenger: Francis R. Scooby, Michael J. Smith, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, and Christina McAuliffe. The Challenger mission was unique because it included Christina, a civilian schoolteacher who was selected to be the first private citizen to fly in space as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. However, the Challenger suffered a massive disaster when the failure of an O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. Cold temperatures in the morning of the launch weakened the O-ring's elasticity, allowing hot gases to escape and damage the external fuel tank, leading to an explosion that was witnessed by millions of people around the world, and it was a devastating blow to NASA and the space program. Following the disaster, the Space Shuttle program was suspended for over 2 years, and significant changes were made to the shuttle's design and launch protocols. After its investigation, the disaster also led to a renewal focus on the importance of safety in human spaceflight. Number 7. Menendez Brothers. We're all fans of something, whether it's art, music, or sports, and for the Menendez brothers, they would be so excited to see that they happen to be in the photo card. But the most disturbing part of this photo is the fact that these two killed their parents before the photo was even taken. They went on a 6-month spending binge with their money. The case was so shocking to the media, including how after the deaths occurred, the brothers went to watch James Bond's License to Kill and tried to use it as an alibi. How a week prior their mother confided to her therapist that she was worried that her sons were psychopaths, and how one brother bought an entire chicken wing restaurant with the parents' money after they had passed away. Their father was an executive in the entertainment industry and both went into private schools, and the older brother Lyle was briefly enrolled in Princeton. After 2 deadlocked juries, LA prosecutors retired the brothers in a courtroom that did not allow cameras, and the new jury found them guilty on 2 counts of the first degree. They were sentenced by the judge to life in prison. Number 6. Aquino. Filipino people have been known to fight resistance against imperialism and oppressors, as that seems to be all of our history to be composed of, and that is the truth. And for Ninoy Aquino, he was a posing threat as the political activist against the long dictatorship and assailant of the martial law, Ferdinand Marcos. He tried to run for president in 1973, but then Marcos declared martial law in 1972, preventing him to run. Benigno Aquino, or as we know by his nickname Ninoy Aquino, was imprisoned by the Marcos regime for speaking out against him, where he was locked in prison and tormented for 7 years. It wasn't until he suffered a heart attack did Marcos' wife Imelda allowed him to go to the United States to get treatment, only under the condition that he does not come back home to the Philippines. But Aquino knew that his love for the people and the Philippines was more important, as there were many people wrongfully prosecuted or just be found dead on the street for protesting against Marcos. He did plan to go back, and before he arrived to the Philippines, he warned reporters, "Hey, this might be the last time you ever actually speak to me," and he was right. In this photo was the photo before he left the plane out towards the Philippines airport. He kept saying he had a bulletproof vest on, but the assailant shot him in the head. There were countless reporters that day that knew something was going on, only for them to be all shocked to see his body on the ground. There's even footage of his assassination online, and his death sparked an outrage throughout all of the Philippines asking for justice. But of course, the United States always has to get involved in something, and they were able to get the Marcos family out of persecution from the very people he tormented and controlled for years.
Number 5. Bathroom hangouts. Bathroom lighting is key when you go out. Those 1 a.m. selfies never looked or felt so good. Ancient Roman times, hanging out in the bathroom with your friends was quite common, but they didn't have any neon lights or quotes and selfies. It was just a lot of bricks. Oh, and also, it smelled really bad. They didn't have the Charmin Ultra less is more lifestyle. They had to use sticks with sponges to wipe. And yeah, of course, they also had to share. Socializing in these ancient toilets was like socializing at a Starbucks. It was normal. You would spend hours here and you got done, literally. Groups of Romans would discuss business, politics, military strategies, all the while a dude's in the corner just like going to the bathroom. Romans believed the goddess Cloacina was the guardian of the toilet drain system. Cloaca Maxima translates to big drain. I guess when you invent the flushing toilet, you can call them whatever you want. Just don't call any meetings there, perhaps. Might be a good start. Number 4, no soap. Sometimes you're in a rush, it happens. You don't have time to shower, so you do the classic spray yourself with cologne and then hope that you fool the world. It's a smart move, but the ancient Romans were way ahead of you. While they didn't clean their clothes with laundry detergent, it's not shocking to hear that they also didn't use soap to wash their bodies. Instead, they rubbed perfume oil all over themselves to get rid of sweat and all that jazz, but later on, once that oil had dried up, it was then removed with a wooden wedge or a spatula-like tool called a striggle. The world's most painful loofah, sign me up. Dirt and sweat would get stuck to this oil and then subsequently just peeled off. So it did work, but it took a little more time than our usual showers nowadays, our 5-minute rushes before work. For Romans who were well off, this was a whole event. There were several assistants you could pick from all these fancy and fragrant oils. It was slow and sensual. How was anybody ever on time back then? Number 3, all the poison. There's always the one kid who's allergic to nuts on your flight. And it's horrible, now nobody gets nuts on this flight. It's tragic, really. Research shows that feeding infants peanuts or peanut products when they're around 4 to 6 months old can prevent a peanut allergy. But Roman emperors had their own way of achieving immunity. It was common for Roman kings to seek out and then consume a small amount of each known poison because they thought at the end of this grueling trial you would become immune to them all. It was a hot blend called Mithridatum, named of course after the poison's creator, Mithridates the Great. He lived until he was 80, so maybe these potions that he created might have actually worked. The world's first vaccine perhaps. Number 2, thumbs up or thumbs down. Giving somebody a thumbs up after they've done something, it feels nice. You're like, yeah. Even a sarcastic thumbs up, use those when you get cut off in traffic. In the hit film Gladiator, there's a scene where Joaquin Phoenix's character gives Russell Crowe's character a thumbs up, and in turn he lives, and then we watch cinematic redemption. In real life, ancient Romans used these thumb signs to determine a gladiator's fate in the Colosseum. It was referred to as pollici verso. It's the Latin term for a turned thumb. The crowd would vote if a gladiator should die or not, which is also insane. It's like America's Got Talent, but like insane. While it's nice to receive a thumbs up after doing something today, if you got a thumbs up or even a thumbs down, it meant your days of living have come to an end. And finally, number 1, animals in the arena. In order to spice up the classic fight and clashing swords till death action, sometimes gladiators would be put into the arena with an animal instead of another human being. Were they squirrels, maybe an opossum, or were they tigers or elephants, bears, lions, leopards, hyenas, wolves? Oh my god, they didn't win these often, did they? Animals were very expensive, so they weren't used all the time, but the organizers of the battle would go all out for the fights if they did include them. Like Logan Paul vs. Mayweather, it's a big social event. Most animals who were used in these great battles unfortunately didn't make it out alive. That's the horrible part as well. I'm a big animal lover, so much so that I'm rooting for the elephants in these fights while reading up about this. This led to another important factor down the road. People loved when animals were included, that eventually trade in exotic animals started taking place. This quickly took the hippo from the Nile and made them extinct. Now cut to today, thousands of species are going extinct.
Number 10, population. Here's the thing, folks. When you do the whole slave thing, you may need more than 1. Maybe 2. Okay, 10 tops, no more than that. Okay, maybe like thousands. Yes, this was true of ancient Rome. While it is difficult to calculate the exact number of people who were slaves, some historians speculate that at least 10% of the population were slaves. And if that number doesn't feel right to you, it's because some say it could really be as high as 20%. That's a lot of folks. And honestly, if we're to study history and understand the mistakes of the past, well, having that many slaves means there's probably more people to join in the angry mob and the revolts, because you have slaves and people don't like that. Number 9, the act itself. I know I didn't have to tell you this, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. The act itself. Now, just an idea, and this is gonna make some corporate overlords faint, but when I say this, maybe we shouldn't put our fellow man in chains and shackles and be forced to complete hard labor for no wage and they're treated like dirt. Just an idea. Less than dirt, actually, sometimes. Look, I know sometimes we as humans don't get along. As a Canadian, playing hockey in school always changed my behavior. I think Chris would agree with this too. We could be the sweetest students ever, but when we get out of that rink, something changes. You start seeing Stanley Cups and Maple Leafs, and probably a forced deal with a very popular coffee shop chain. But all that seething Canadian rage never made me want to treat people the way slaves were treated. What I'm getting at is, even at our worst, we would never do that. I wouldn't do that, Chris wouldn't do that, we're not gonna do that. Number 8, work to work. I guess one slightly good thing about being a Roman slave is that, well, if you could even call a good thing in that, really, is that there was a chance to work for your freedom. Literally slaving away in the hot Roman sun for years just so you can get your freedom, so you can work and sweat in the hot Roman sun for years for very little pay. Not so great when you put it that way. I hope there's a sunscreen budget. Some slaves could buy their freedom, some were freed by their masters, and getting freed was actually a big deal, as there was sometimes a ceremony where a slave and then a public official would touch the head of the slave of the staff. Abracadabra, alakazam, wishy-washy, sloshy, poof. Magic, you're free now. So simple, right? Almost like it didn't have to happen in the first place. Huh? Number 7, second-class citizen. You may have heard this term thrown around a little bit, but becoming a citizen of Rome was kind of a big deal. Your social status kind of defined how you lived. You'd think being a slave, sweating away in the Mediterranean sun wasn't bad enough. There was a lot of red tape to go with this as well. So many rules. When freeing slaves, no more than 100 at a time could be freed. Okay, but I have a few issues with that. If your house has 100 slaves, you probably ain't gonna give up 100 in the first place. Now the rule says under no circumstances can you free 100 slaves at one time. Okay, what if you break it up? Say you do 50 at a time. What if you do 99 slaves and leave one until later? What if you release one at 11:59 and then the rest at midnight? What if some of the slaves are missing limbs from hard labor and only count as half? Let's say you release 99 and one half slaves at 11:59 and the last half at midnight. You see what I'm saying? There's too many rules. I can't deal with that, man. Too many rules. No. Number 6, foundation. Okay, everyone loves Rome. Who doesn't? You got your legions, you got your colosseums, you got your aqueducts. Oh, it's a big deal. As it turns out, the Romans were good at building stuff. Most impressive, honestly, was their roads. I know that's not as cool as the buildings, but trust me, anyone who actually knows architecture in the comments is gonna quietly nod their head and agree with me, and so yeah, he's right, actually, yeah. Roman roads last 2,000 years. Toronto is still waiting for the Eglinton Crosstown. That's a local inside joke, but trust me, it'll slap. Where the hell is that thing? Come on. The point I'm getting at is Romans built a lot of great stuff, and it could not have been so without the efforts of the many slaves who built their roads, tended their farms, and did just about everything. Honestly, it was built on the whole thing.
Number 5, banking. Today online banking is super easy, but back in the old West days, you didn't get a courtesy email, you didn't have overdraft, nothing like that. In fact, the United States national banking system didn't even exist until 1863. So what happened before then? Are we just hiding our money in our underwear? What are we doing? Before then, you'd have what were called wildcat banks. And these wildcat banks would take deposits for a short amount of time, and then unannounced, out of nowhere, they would run. They would disappear overnight with all of your money, everything, your whole life savings, gone. They did the long con. They played the long game. They were actors. So you're telling me they pretended to be bankers for months at a time? That's almost impressive. They'd have the fake mustache. Oh, good morning, sir. Sign here, please. They lied. They faked it for months. They just lied for months and then dipped out of nowhere. Thankfully, after 1863, a noble profession was to work at a bank and, not steal everybody's money. The Hudson Bay Company, Wells Fargo, these big names, they all gained trust over time because of these fake Looney Tune banks. Imagine, how do you not break character? You're like, okay, and that's you all set up. They're like, we got it, go. Number 4, seam squirrels. Nothing to do with squirrels before you get upset. Here we go. During the Old West era, personal hygiene was not a priority for many people, and lice infestations were all too common. Nice, now I'm itchy doing this list, love that. The type of lice that affected people during this time was commonly known as body lice, which could be, well, obviously found in the seams of clothing, hence the term seam squirrels. I got some squirrels on my body, nice, that's great, so itchy, so disgusting. Body lice was a major problem during the Old West era, and they were responsible for the spread of diseases like typhus, trench fever, relapsing fever, all the fevers, any fever just coming your way, right into your mouth and eyes, horrible. These diseases were often fatal, and many people in the Old West succumbed to them. So to combat the spread of lice and the diseases that they carried, people in the Old West often resorted to extreme measures, such as burning their clothing or even shaving their heads completely bald. Bunch of bald cowboys. Bunch of naked bald cowboys walking around being like, where's my money? I thought this was a bank. Number 3, resurrectionalist. While Boot Hill sees folks going into the ground, a resurrectionalist was responsible for the exact opposite. Yeah, bring him back up. We actually made a mistake. Get that guy back out of there. These guys were responsible for digging up dead bodies, and then they would sell them to medical schools for like $9. It was really disgusting. Now, this was the late 1820s, and at this time in Edinburgh, Scotland, believe it or not, the medical science community was on the up and up, so this was needed for that to work. But in order to study new medicines and, avoid the next plague, they needed these guys. They needed these resurrectionalists to rise the dead like they're a White Walker in Game of Thrones. I don't know, that's what I imagine in my head. Would you rather work a Boot Hill type job, or would you rather get paid to dig up bodies? Put them in or take them out? Comment down below. Both are so horrible. Couldn't imagine picking. Number 2, bad bartenders. When we think of old saloons, the old Western saloons, kicking in those crazy doors, we imagine some catchphrases and whiskey and all that fun stuff. Everyone's loud, it's Peaky Blinders, whatever. No, not at all. It was the exact opposite of fun. The bartender would pour a drink, the cowboy would take the bottle instead because he's an alcoholic, and also that's super illegal. Back in the Wild West days, you could do whatever you want. You could drink what you want, you could serve what you want. Anything goes. Bartenders also had no regulations to follow behind that sketchy bar. So not only was it very high proof, but some bevies like tarantula juice would just straight up kill you. Yeah, if its name didn't tip you off, if you're drinking tarantula juice, it's because it's made with poisonous ingredients. Tarantula juice was made from strychnine, and if you drink it, well, you'll feel like there's tarantulas crawling all over your skin. Huh, how fun is that? Cool. Which button do I press to not tip? Thanks so much. Number 1, medical shows. Today, medical shows are fascinating. Even on YouTube, Dr. Pimple Popper, are you kidding me? I can gag all day and watch that, it's the best. Back in the Wild West, the 1860s to the 1890s specifically, they had what's called medicinal showmen. Now these guys, these showstoppers, they would show up in your town selling elixirs and tonics because everyone needed one, of course. Everyone needs to live a happy and comfortable life, but they were full of lies. Don't listen to these guys, all right? These professional medicinal showmen would have pawns run ahead, stay in your town, and then wait. They would plant themselves in the audience before these random demonstrations of amazing medical elixir shows began. So they'd call up random audience members, one of these being their buddy, and then these magical elixirs would treat their ailments just like that. What an amazing show. I'm in. I'm gonna buy this immediately. One of the most successful of these elixirs was the elixir made from John Healy and Charles Bigelow. It was a mixture of herbs, roots, and animal fat, and it was said to treat any illness back in the day. But in reality, it was an extremely strong laxative. So imagine finding that out on the way home. You're like, hey, I'm exploding out of my body. What's going on? I don't think that worked back there.
In 10th place, we have the criminal George Washington. The George Washington, whose gravestone is pictured, was not the first US president, but the first prisoner executed via electric chair in Texas. On February 8th of 1924, Texas executed a total of 5 inmates using its brand new electric chair, which remains a state record for the highest number of executions in a single day. In 1923, Levi Todd, who lived in the same area, made himself a new gambling table and promised George Washington he would give him the leftover lumber. But Levi gave the wood to another man, and George was so incensed that he shot and killed Levi as he sat playing poker with some friends seated around that new table. And to add to his crime, George shot Levi's terrified wife as she ran past a window in the Todd home. Mrs. Todd thankfully didn't die. He shot the Todd's dog and emptied his bullet device trying to kill one of the poker players, Frank Larry. But none of his bullets struck Frank, and he emptied his own safety device at Washington, hitting him with a load of buckshot. When the shooting subsided, Washington ran into the woods, only to be discovered a few days later as he slept, and well, the rest is history. I do have a fun fact for y'all though. The electric chair actually has a name. Old Sparky, and it is currently on public display as part of a replica death chamber at the Texas Prison Museum in Huntsville, Texas, along with tubing and straps used in Texas's first execution by lethal injection. Cool, I might go visit that museum now. In 9th place, we have Victorian death photographs. Photographs of loved ones taken after they died may seem kind of morbid by today's standards, but in Victorian England, they were a way of commemorating the dead and blunting the sharpness of grief. Remember, unless you were rich enough to have a painting commissioned, there really wasn't a way to preserve visual proof that someone existed, and how they looked for future generations. In images that are both unsettling and strangely poignant, families pose with the dead, and consumptive young ladies elegantly recline, the disease not only taking their life, but increasing their beauty. Victorian life was suffused with death. epidemics such as diphtheria, typhus, and cholera scarred the country. And from 1861 onwards, the bereaved queen made mourning fashionable. Trinkets of memento mori, meaning remember you must die, took several different forms and existed long before Victorian times. Long exposures when taking photographs meant the dead were often seen more sharply than the slightly blurred living because of their, lack of movement. On some occasions, eyes would be painted onto the photograph after it was developed, which was meant to make the deceased more lifelike, while other times death was more obvious. Locks of hair cut from the dead were arranged and worn in lockets and rings. Death masks were created in wax, and the images and symbols of death appeared in paintings and sculptures. But in the mid-1800s, photography was becoming increasingly popular and affordable, leading to memento mori, photographic portraiture. Try saying that 5 times fast. You don't want to know how many times I failed. The first successful form of photography, the daguerreotype, was an expensive luxury, but not nearly as costly as having a portrait painted, which previously had been the only way of permanently preserving someone's image. As the number of photographers increased, the cost of these photos fell. Less costly procedures were introduced in the 1850s, such as using thin metal, glass, or paper rather than silver. I see where Weekend at Bernie's got their inspiration. In 8th place, we have a ghostly mural. The ghostly figures shown in this mural in the Karl-Strasse tunnel in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, depict the 21 young people who died in a stampede in 2010 at Love Parade, a German music festival. At least 500 others were injured in the devastating tragedy. The Love Parade was a free-access music festival and parade that originated in 1989 in Berlin. The parade featured stages, but also had floats with music, DJs, and dancers moving through the audience. The Love Parade in Duisburg was the first time that the festival had been held in a closed-off area. Between 200,000 and 1.4 million people were reported to be attending the event, and 3,200 police were on hand. As a consequence of the disaster, the organizer of the festival announced that no further Love Parades would be held and that the festival was permanently cancelled. Criminal charges were brought against 10 employees of the city of Duisburg and the company that organized the event, but eventually rejected by the court due to the prosecutor's failure to establish evidence for the alleged acts of negligence and their, causal connection to the deaths. The mural was established by an unknown artist as a reminder of the sad day. In 7th place, time to meet American physicist Harold Agnew. As you might have assumed, pictured is, that physicist, holding the nuclear core of the Fat Man atomic bomb, which was dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. The bomb ended up killing about 80,000 people, many of which who died from the long-term effects it caused, like radiation illness and leukemia. It was the second of the only 2 nuclear weapons ever used in warfare, and its detonation marked the 3rd nuclear explosion in history. It was built by scientists and engineers at Los Alamos Laboratory using plutonium from the Hanford site, and was dropped from the Boeing B-29 Superfortress boxcar piloted by Major Charles Sweeney. The name Fat Man refers to the early design of the bomb because it had a wide round shape. Fat Man was an implosion-type nuclear weapon with a solid plutonium core. In 6th place, we have Karl Wallenda. Karl Wallenda was a German-American high-wire artist and the founder of the Flying Wallendas, a daredevil circus troupe whose members performed dangerous stunts far above the ground, often without a safety net, and still perform to this day. The photo that stayed with me was from a triumphant moment in 1978, just after he crossed the Tower Bridge in London by, tightrope. Later that year, at the age of 73, Karl attempted a walk between the 2 towers of the 10-story Condado Plaza Hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico, on a wire stretched 121 feet above the pavement. As a result of high winds and an improperly secured wire, he lost his balance and fell during the attempt, and it was caught entirely on camera. Speaking of the Flying Wallendas troupe, as I mentioned before, they still perform to this day, with Karl's great-grandson Nick Wallenda breaking world records and performing feats that make my stomach turn.
Number 5. Last Best Hope. Romulus Augustulus was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. History gets kind of crazy after this point, but let's be real, what's more scandalous than being the last ruler of your empire? Could he have saved it? Would the world have looked different if he did? Truth be told, not a lot of records survived his reign, so we don't really know. Perhaps it's because he didn't have much time to write things down. Or maybe because he was still a minor when he inherited the failing Roman Empire. Or really it was because Rome's worst nightmare had come true. The barbarians at the gates had taken over Rome. The German barbarian general Odoacer took over and claimed himself to be the king of Italy, which ushered in the end of the Great Western Roman Empire. Talk about scandal. Number 4. Excess, excess, excess. Emperor Elagabalus is what I think of when I think of a Roman emperor. Someone who is pampered in a time where most people don't have access to really anything easily. Eating grapes off the vine, bottles of wine, and your servants are looking fine. Alright, alright, alright. His life of decadence was also matched with the classic level of unaliving those who oppose you, or rather groups that you feel need to be persecuted. Even more scandalous than that is the question of his sexuality. Oh. While being debated by historians today, there are rumors that the decadent emperor may have been having a relationship with his male chariot driver. There's also rumors of the emperor wearing women's clothes. Very scandalous indeed, oh handsome emperor. Number 3. Senate Purge. I am the Senate, said Tiberius, knowing that he had a really cool name. While not the worst emperor on this list, he did purge the Senate in times of political unrest, just like everyone's favorite space emperor and one of my worst impressions. He wasn't a popular choice for the job, as he really only came to power through a series of misfortunes. All of this leads to a lackluster leader who, when he retired to an island off the coast of Italy, rewarded his mediocre work with some stuff to do with younger people that I just can't say on YouTube. Apparently, he became a heavy drinker and got himself involved in all kinds of vices. It is speculated that Emperor Caligula was a child on this island and may have witnessed this debauchery. It's speculated that this may have influenced his acts of sin, and honestly not sure what to call, as these guys are, I don't know what you call this, these guys are all messed up, man, I don't know, they're just crazy. Number 2, no holidays. Septimus Severus sounds like a brothel related disease in the Harry Potter universe. But actually, he was a traditional guy. He liked things Roman and wanted to keep it that way. So, when the Jewish and Christian faith made their way to Rome, he wasn't a happy guy. So he had them persecuted. The only thing saving these people from a short Roman sword was if they worshipped the emperor and the emperor gods as well. For some reason, that made him a little more forgiving. However, considering he wasn't the only emperor to feel this way, I would think again before decorating a Christmas tree or lighting a menorah in Rome. Of course, I'm only making humor of what probably was an awful time for those religious factions. We like to romanticize Rome, but she's not all perfect. Number 1, eye for an eye. Empress Irene of the Eastern Roman Empire may have been a woman, but was just as ruthless and bloodthirsty as her male counterparts. While a lot of people probably had an issue with her leading as a woman, I'd like to hope more people today have a problem with her politics and how she came to power. A little unaliving here, cozying up over there, playing the game until she got what she wanted. And there was this one time that she wasn't too happy with her son's politics, and it was likely he was going to have her power removed, so he needed to go on a timeout. She had some guards gouge his eyes out, which mortally wounded him. No big deal or anything. I guess there was no timeout corner back then. I went to Rome to the chief's palace. He bestowed upon me this wisdom after learning about Irene. That ain't it.
So, starting us off at number 10 is Phantom Clouds and Darkness. Nebula IRAS 05437 plus 2502 doesn't have a very catchy name. These are NASA experts after all. As we learned from Elon Musk, their naming creativity, even for literal offspring, doesn't go much further than point and pick some numbers and letters. But it does certainly look like it's a surrealist painting, to say the least. I could honestly get lost in the layers, arches, and rolling clouds that create an almost religious image with just how awe-inspiring it is. Staring at it long enough, you may see a phantom rising up from the back of the dust clouds, or an angelic figure at the top of the floating yet mountainous staircase with an arched entryway. NASA and ESA's Hubble Space Telescope took this image in 2010, but scientists are still unsure what causes the bright glowing arc near the center. Maybe it's truly divine. Number 9 is, well, it's hard to find words, but its name is the Gaping Maw. Ew, don't like that personally. Anyways, it's specifically the gaping maw of a sunspot. The sun is an active place with filaments, holes, and flares that are constantly shifting across its face like a pool of liquid magma. That what you see is a close-up look at a very dramatic sunspot as seen by the Big Bear Solar Observatory's telescope in 2010. This gape could be compared to a few things. Maybe the toothy opening of the Sarlacc pit in Star Wars, or if you fired a bullet through a grapefruit like the Mythbusters. I can tell you from my very unfortunate experience experience that this is also kind of what it's like to look into a puncture wound on the human body and see the tissue inside. No matter what you see, I'm sure it's something uncomfortable enough that you just want me to move on. So I will. Number 8 is Ghostly Hand. I'm not even a Marvel fan, and their franchise is what I thought of when I saw this picture. It's giving Scarlet Witch, or Doctor Strange, or even Morgan Le Fay, which if you've seen the recent video Historic Sorcerers that actually had powers, you'd know is a character of Arthurian legend found in the Marvel Strike Force comic series that Aubrey Plaza will be playing on the big screen. If you haven't seen that video, maybe check it out, and while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to The Hive. Anyways, this ghostly hand was caused by a pulsar lurking in the center, which, to quote, is a rapidly spinning neutron star which is spewing energy out into the space around it to create complex and intriguing structures, including one that resembles a large cosmic hand, according to NASA, who snapped the picture in 2009 with their Chandra X-ray Observatory. Thanks to the pulsar, a disembodied phantom-like hand looks to be grasping at the void. Calling all the ancient astronauts. Number 7 will be about the thigh bone. As you can imagine, this picture you see on screen caused quite a kerfuffle online after NASA released the image in 2014. Understandably so, because this appears to be a thigh bone smack dab in the middle of Mars. NASA, who's just so tired of us and likely assumed that this would happen, pretty much instantaneously released a statement that no, this is not a human or an alien or whatever's thigh bone. This is apparently just a rock that very conveniently eroded by wind or water to look like that. Because notoriously, there's lots of wind and water on Mars. Literally. Anyways, sorry folks, no alien burial grounds are on Mars if we want to believe the Space People Company. Number 6, we get to check out the Skull Nebula, which to me looks like a circle. I don't know, I'm not very sold, but apparently this bad boy creeps a lot of folks out. The Skull Nebula is a consistent in our galaxy, built up of several stars doing an elaborate orbital dance, in the words of NASA. This particular picture was taken in 2020. What earned it the skull name was obviously its ghastly colors, reminiscent of, well, a flayed human skull. The telescope's view highlights of the nebula's hydrogen in red and oxygen content, which is light blue. Also, if you kind of turn your head to the left like this and look at it sideways, you can kind of see the two stars sitting in what's arguably the eye socket, a thick red cloud making up the nose, and the empty space where cheeks are meant to be surrounding teeth. So what do you think? Spooky scary skeleton or space dodgeball?